Hey Church 180, so glad to join us for today. Our Church 180 What Up page is the page designed to be your one-stop shop with everything you need to connect with Church 180 over a weekend. These are the links for signing up for those following along with the message and even Spotify links so that you can give a listen to the music that we sing in the service. You can access that page via church180sd.com/whatup or by opening the camera on your phone and holding it over the QR code that is on the bottom right portion of your screen. Hey, we are preparing to meet in the park much more frequently. We said we were planning another gathering in person for the month of May, so mark your calendar for Sunday, May 23rd. As we continue to meet more frequently, we are looking to boost our setup team, hospitality team, and 180 Kids team. If you're interested in serving with Church 180 in one of these ways, please let us know. All the details are on our What Up page, so check it out. We exist and inspire hope because so many of you have decided to give generously. We believe that generosity is the very thing that enables Church 180 to live out our vision of seeing more and more people turn towards hope in Jesus. That being said, you can give online or set up a recurring financial gift at church180sd.com/give. It's on the What Up page, or mail a check to our PO box that is on our website. Hope you enjoy the service and have a great day.
So he had been interviewed by 4 professional football teams, all with a big no thank you at the end of it. See, his tactics were absurd to them. I mean, literally, they would ask him, what will be your game plan? What will be your strategy for leading this team? And he said, it will be all in their habits. You see, I'm going to coach this team that's going to work harder than everybody else. We're going to start by working harder than everybody else, and then we're going to reduce the amount of decisions that need to be made on the field. Like their habits will be so ingrained into them that they will just become reactionary. And then as a result of working harder, and as a result of just reacting, see, football, it's a game of milliseconds. And if you don't have to think about it, you've gained those milliseconds. And because of those habits, they would be better. And they would be faster. But four teams said, absolutely no way. We are not going to be the guinea pigs for this. But there was this team in Florida that was terrible. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who said, we will try. We will take you, and we will do that. And so the Buccaneers were awful at this time. See, they were planning. They hadn't won a game on the West Coast in over 15 years. Okay, they hadn't traveled the country and won a game in over 15 years, and it was one beautiful, I'm guessing beautiful, San Diego day in 1996 that they made the journey from Florida all the way over to our beautiful city to play the Chargers, and something was different that day. See, something was different. Over the past year, see, these skills had been culminating, these habits had been forming, these reactions were taking place, the work was being done, and the work was good. And on this beautiful San Diego day that the Buccaneers came to play the Chargers, something was different. And see, this strategy would converge into the fourth quarter to bring them the biggest upset of the season to that point as they defeated our late Chargers here. See, this began the legacy of the great Tony Dungy. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Dungy, but this began the legacy of him. He's arguably one of the best coaches in the NFL history. But the problem was, there was one problem with his coaching at this point, okay? His tactics worked. What he was trying to do, it worked for all of the regular season, but then they would get into the postseason. The Bucs would get into the postseason, and they would come into the game that mattered the most, and they would come up against stiff competition, and they would revert back to old tactics. And as Tony would say, the players would start to think and not to react. And the thinking would cost them the game when it mattered the most. So eventually, Tony was fired from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they would go on to win, with his the way that he developed the players, the way he developed the team, and everything like that in the future. But he was fired from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and everything. So we're gonna jump into that a little bit more in a little bit. Welcome to Church 180 Online this week. We are so glad that you've joined us. Sorry for starting off Mother's Day with talking about Tony Dungy and NFL and football to all you moms, but I think you can track with me for today. We celebrate you. We're with you. We love you. You are the bedrock, and I know in my family, my wife Kelsey, the bedrock in our family in so many ways, and our house would be an utter disaster without her, as most of yours would be without the moms in your life. We love you. We thank you. Man, good stuff. Happy Mother's Day. But here's what we've said in this series. We call it 50-50. We've said nearly half of your life is habitual. Nearly half, according to recent science, nearly 50% of what you do is in your habits. Your life, your life consists of your habits. Isn't that crazy to think about, like almost half of what you do? And so what we've said is this in this series. We just said, hey, let's call it 50-50. Why not make what you do repeatedly intentional? Why not bring some intentionality into what you do with 50% of your life in your habits? A little bit, I want to do a little bit of review from last week and kind of where we're going. Last week we talked about what a habit is. We said a habit is basically this. It's going to come up on the screen here, that a habit is a cue. Yep, habit is a cue that can be, they can come from a visual trigger. Maybe you saw something and it started the habit. It could be the time of day, it could be an emotion, it could be a sequence of thought, or it could be a person. And then once the cue happens, once the cue comes into play, then there's a routine. And see, the routine is the actual habit. It's the thing that you do. It's the thing that you do based on the cue. Like I said last week, I said it's the time of day. And early in the morning, the time of day, I'm groggy, I'm tired, and because it's that time of day, the cue leads me to the routine. The routine is that I need to walk over to my Keurig and make a cup of coffee. That is the habit, and I need to drink that here. And then based on the cue and based on the routine, then the third section of that is there's a reward. See, your brain is processing whether or not to remember that loop based on what happens based on the routine. So if the cue brings across a routine that brings something into your brain that your brain's like, oh yeah, that's great, then it stores it away as a loop. But if your brain's like, oh, that was a great reward, it doesn't remember it at all, and it's not really a habit at the end of the day. So we said that, and then finally last week, we landed on the best way to find motivation to living the life that you want and the life that God desires for you is in gaining the proper perspective. So we looked at this passage from the book of Psalm, chapter 90, written by Moses, who'd experienced so much adversity. He'd experienced the wrath of God. He'd experienced the providence of God. He'd experienced God providing for him, literally. And Moses, he says in verse 12 of chapter 90, he says, "Teach us, O Lord, to number our days, that we may have a heart of wisdom." And what we said is the 30,000-foot view of this 50-50 series is to start with the right perspective. And the right perspective is that we number our days and realize that we are living one fleeting, momentary blip on the radar life, and that it will be over soon. And when we get that kind of perspective, when the Lord teaches us to number our days, then it helps us to do a few things. It helps us to make them count. It helps us to live out our values and helps us to live out our goals, and it helps us to live for something bigger than ourselves, I believe. And the reality, though, is this, is that you can get the right perspective, right, as we talked about last week, and you can desire to live for something bigger than yourself. You can desire to live your values and goals, and you can desire to make your days count. But we know it's hard, isn't it, right? It's hard. I mean, we don't just get this new perspective and voila, change. I mean, we want to, but sometimes it just seems like we can't make the changes that we desire and we want to make, right? I mean, let's be honest. Most of us have, well, not most of us, all of us have struggles. We have tendencies, we have things in our lives that we wish we could eradicate and get rid of, and we have things in our lives that we wish were a part of them, but that isn't. I mean, I think about this, and I don't know, anybody with me? Like, anybody struggle with yelling at their kids in COVID, right? I live in a townhome community. People walk past sometimes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the window was open. And then I'm like, why do I care what people think? I shouldn't be yelling at my kids like this. And we have struggles not adhering to nutrition that we would like to live. We have struggles relying on pills or alcohol or whatever else for a quick fix or escape or just to relax. We've got struggles with just maybe a COVID laziness or general laziness, struggles with too much Netflix or video games or social media or whatever, fill in the blank, struggles with what some of us look at on our computer screens, struggles with not giving God, our marriage, or our family the attention that it deserves or that we would desire to give to them. See, 2020 has gotten some of us, many of us, it's brought about some good things. We talked about that last week. It's brought about, there are probably some things from 2020 that we're like, man, I want to walk that into 2021 and 2022. But I'm guessing, because I know me, that 2020 has left some of us in a few ruts, right? I got a picture, this is not it, but I got a picture of my first vehicle right here. It was exactly like this. It was a 1994 Jeep Cherokee, even had the red strip that I hated down the side. I put a little piece of black electric tape over there. That's what I did to kind of cover that up. Man, this Jeep, not this Jeep, but my Jeep that was like this Jeep, got into a few ruts, okay? I thought it was always a great idea in high school to go off-roading and back into some friends, like, pasture fields whenever it rained a lot and it was muddy. And I don't know how many times I got this thing stuck in some ruts as a result of doing that. And here's the thing about ruts. They're hard to get out of. They're hard to get out of. And my guess is that, honestly, I think many of us over the course of our lives, and over the course of 2020, have found ourselves in a few ruts. And I think that many of us over the course of our lives have maybe found ourselves feeling a little bit like the Apostle Paul when he writes out of the book of Romans, chapter 7. Paul is this writer who contributed to so much of the New Testament, who is an adamant, against Jesus, but then had an experience with Jesus and was all in for the desires of God through Jesus in his life. And he pens this it's quite beautiful and agonizing and a lot of other things in Romans chapter 7. And I want us to look at it together tonight. It's Romans chapter 7. We're going to be starting in verse 15. And it says this. I do not understand what I do. Anybody with me? I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it's the sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I'm going to say it one more time. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Anybody with me? Anybody there? Anybody living in that space today? That you have the desire to do what's good, but feel unable, unequipped, like impossible to live it out and to carry it out. Well, you're in good company with the Apostle Paul. He goes on to say this. I think we're going to be in verse 21. But he says this. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me every step of the way. Every step of the way. Evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Who will rescue me when it seems that nearly, however, half of your life is in your habits? Who will rescue me when it seems as though half of my life in the habits are what I don't want to be doing, or not what I do want to be doing? Who is going to help me when it comes to that? See, if you're new to the whole church thing, I want to stop and make this a little bit simpler. God's law, when it comes to God's law, out of that passage that we just read, it just equals this. It equals God's desire for how we live our lives. So God's law is his desire. There's a ton of stuff in the Old Testament that we see from how God desired his people, the nation of Israel, would live. And then we see a lot of stuff in the New Testament that is carried on through Jesus and through the apostles in things that God desires to be in our lives and in a way that he desires to be in our lives. So God's desire for how we live our lives. Sin equals not living according to God's desire for our lives. And so just to understand that passage, he's saying God's law, which is his desire for our lives, and sin is not living according to God's desires for our lives. But the reality is, I think you don't have to be a Jesus follower to track with Paul and the tension that he's talking about. If you're a Jesus follower, I think you get this, but you don't have to be a Jesus follower to get this tension Paul's talking about. See, there are habits that you have that you hate, right? There are things in your life that you do that you wish that you did not do. And there are things in your life that you wish you did, habits that you wish that you could develop that can't seem to take hold, right? They can't seem to happen. They can't seem to get off the ground. They can't seem to happen. And so what do you do? Or in Church 180 language, where do you turn when you don't know what to do? See, I came across this story this week about a guy named Bill Wilson. I don't know if anybody knows who Bill Wilson is, but around 1935, okay? Around 1935, he was a soldier who had fought in World War I, and he was a young officer in the military who ended up, okay, at a fancy dinner party at the age of 22, okay? So he's at this fancy dinner party, and so you got to understand, he'd never had a drop of alcohol in his life leading up to this point. He's 22, hasn't had any alcohol at all, and at this dinner party for officers in the military, he was handed a cocktail to which he tried. And he was like, "Oh man, this cocktail is really good. I like this thing." And he ended up finding himself at several more of those dinner parties with several more of those cocktails. And he's quoted as saying that he found alcohol to be the sweet elixir of life. And, and a few dinner parties turned into more and more and more and more and more cocktails, to the point that he found himself a little bit later consuming 3 bottles of alcohol per day. And see, eventually he unsuccessfully checked himself into rehab 4 separate times, only to have a period of sobriety, and then a time of relapse back into it. And so at about the age of 39, so 17 years after his first drink, at about the age of 39, he was getting together with an old drinking buddy, an old officer in the military that he was with, and the guy came over, and they were he was reportedly pouring an entire bottle of gin into a pitcher to be mixed with some pineapple juice, and was about to serve his buddy, and his buddy was like, "Man, I've been sober for a couple of months now, and things are going really good. I've found God." And not only have I found God, I've actually getting plugged into a church community, and man, I'm doing really good, and I am done. And he was like, "Man, you're crazy, man." He was like, "You're one of those like wacko like God people and stuff. Fine, great, you don't drink or anything, but what the heck?" But something was starting to happen in Bill at that point. You see, he ended up finishing the gin himself that day, and his friend went a separate way. But something was starting to happen inside of him. And so he kept drinking, and a little while later ended back up in rehab. And he was being treated with some medications that were in the time, that I guess that caused a little bit of hallucinating. And then as he was like withdrawing and all this from it, and as he was kind of coming back and coming down, he was just utterly in agony, devastated and depressed. And in a moment, he remembered his friend, and he called out to God, and he said, "God, if you save me, I'll give you my life." And he described what he experienced as some kind of bright light and some kind of spiritual awakening that put him on a new journey to where he believed in God. And as a result, he claims it, as a result of his belief in God, as a result of his belief in something bigger, as a result of as believing, he, like legit, for the next 37 years of his life, never had another drop of alcohol from that. And he went on to found what many of us know, that spread worldwide and treated millions upon millions of people, called Alcoholics Anonymous, in the 12-step plan, which confounded science and confounded psychology at the time, because all science and psychology, they're looking at the 12 steps and they're like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't equate, because there's nothing scientific and there's nothing psychological about what is going on here. People need to be treated in rehab centers, but they were finding that rehab centers weren't quite doing it. They would get people to a certain point of sobriety for a certain period of time, but then something would happen, a bump in the road would come, a stressful event would come, something would happen, and then they would turn back to what it was that they were addicted to and old habits. But with Bill in Alcoholics Anonymous, they were calling on a higher power. They were calling on God. They were calling out of the power of belief that they could change and that they could be different. And it took. I want to go back to Tony Dungy for a second, okay? Because he was fired from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's where we left off at the beginning. And yet he coached an incredible record. See, the tactics couldn't seal the deal when the season was on the line. And their game plan was incredibly successful until they got to the postseason. When they got to the postseason, everybody reverted back to their old habits. And Tony started to realize that it was very similar to what we're talking about with Bill Wilson, that it was because when things hit the fan and stuff started to happen, the players didn't actually believe in the game plan when the game was on the line. And he started to notice this and didn't know what to do about it. And about that time, he lost one of his sons to a tragically, he lost one of his sons. And the team started to rally around him. And the next year would be different. Because the relationships that were forged, the stuff that would happen, the next year would be different. And that would be the year that Tony Dungy would get his first Super Bowl championship, as the players adopted a belief in the plan, a belief in the greater plan that was going on. And see, I say all this because what does it mean for me and what does it mean for you when it comes to half of our life being habitual and half of our life being our habits? See, I want to go back to our passage. I want to finish our passage. We're going to go back to verse 24 right here. It says, "What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that's subject to death?" Verse 25, "Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord." And see, this is the natural second place that we have to go in our 50-50 series. See, first week, we got to get the right perspective, but this week we got to realize that it is Jesus who will help us change in our lives. It is Jesus who as Paul talks about in Colossians, helps us to put off the old self and to put on the new self. It is Jesus and belief in Him that has the power to help you start to change your life one habit at a time. I think about this, and man, in Jesus there's power to put away some of the habits that you hate. In Jesus there's power to develop some of the habits that you want. In Jesus, without Jesus, I think about, for me, I am like just one craft beer away from yelling at my kids constantly. Okay, through Jesus, we have the power to overcome that. Through Jesus, you have the power to overcome sin that may have been in your family and in your life for generations. There's power to not yell at your kids. There's power to overcome destructive habits. There's power to bring love into your family, your marriage, your workplace, your neighborhood. There's power to be a different person this year, coming out of the ruts of 2020 and COVID. So last week was the 30,000-foot view, number your days so that you can make them count, live your values and live your goals. This week is legitimately just to turn toward Jesus and turn toward hope, which has to do with your habits. We're going to move into a time of communion. This week, communion is literally where we recognize that there is power to overcome your habits. Because through communion, remember the death of Jesus and remember the resurrection of Jesus. Literally a dead body coming to life because of the power of God. And so each week we just take a little bit of juice or drink and a little bit of food to represent that body of Jesus that was broken, the blood of Jesus that was spilled out, so that we could see there's power to overcome our hang-ups. So we could see that there's power to be right before the eyes of God. And so I want to encourage you to do that as we sing this next song and as I pray for you and for your belief. Jesus, thank you for, God, just for the cross. As we come to this moment every single week and remembering your body that was broken, your blood that was poured out, God, this week specifically, may we find hope in that. May we find the belief in that, Lord. Belief that because you were raised from the dead, because you have that kind of power, because you have that kind of authority, that you can help us in our lives overcome some of the things that we hate, that we do, and that we can develop some of the things that we want, that you want for us in our lives, Lord. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
The bread in your body, the wine in your blood, sweet communion, set a table for us. The crucified Jesus, no greater love than the bread in your body, than the wine in your blood. Oh, we will remember. Jesus, our Savior. Oh, just to know you in your suffering, just to get me closer than I've ever been. We will remember. The holes in your hands, the wound in your side, 39 lashes brought me back to life. Before resurrection, there was a grave. Jesus, our Savior. Oh, just to know you when you're suffering, just to get me closer than I've ever been. Oh, oh, oh.